Chosen one, come closer, because this message is for you. Yes, you. The one who's been doubting your worth, questioning your light, wondering if anyone truly sees what you carry. Let me remind you of something. You're not just another face in the crowd. You're not ordinary. You're not replaceable. You are anointed, chosen, and wrapped in a kind of favor this world can't duplicate. You've survived storms others would have drowned in. You've held it all together when everything in you was breaking. And still, you showed up with love, with grace, with power. That is not weakness. That is spiritual strength in its purest form. And to anyone who mishandled you, to anyone who tried to dim what was divine about you, oh, trust me, they're already feeling the aftermath, because you can't violate what heaven has marked and walk away untouched. So stand taller, straighten your crown. This isn't just your comeback season. This is your confirmation. You were never just good enough. You were always the blessing they didn't know how to keep. And what's coming for you now, far greater than what you lost. Welcome to your glow up. Welcome to your redemption arc. Welcome to the undeniable proof that being chosen comes with both a weight and a reward. And you were born to carry both. Looking for purpose and peace? Hit subscribe and start the journey. Some assume parting ways is just the collapse of affection. But for those carrying a quiet calling, every bond carries unseen dimensions. This presence is no ordinary presence. It rearranges the air around others, steadies what would have toppled, softens what would have hardened. When deception crept in, through broken words, through hidden alliances, through shadows cast behind the back, it did not simply wound a heart. It disturbed a delicate order written beyond sight. There was a quiet shield surrounding them they never even noticed. It was the reason storms passed them by, why paths seemed clear, why the weight of their own chaos never crushed them completely. But they mistook that calm as coincidence, that support as something they were entitled to. They shattered what was entrusted as though it were just glass, and not the very mirror of their own favor. When someone mishandles a rare gift, the balance does not tip at human hands, but at the hands of time itself. What slipped away was not just tenderness, but alignment itself. That's why, in the aftermath, small certainties turned brittle, plans unraveled, and sleep grew shallow. The harmony that once hummed in their days became a quiet ache. They lost more than a companion. They lost the current that carried them forward. Somewhere deep, the realization flickers, step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. This is why unease follows them now, why their gaze lingers on what they can no longer reach, and conversations seem to circle back to what was lost. They did not merely play with feelings, they trespassed on something they never truly understood. The sharpest sting lies in how close they stood to the rarest kind of honesty. They saw the rawness, the steadfastness, the depth, and thought it would always wait. But pride can blind even the watchful. And now memory itself has become a quiet punishment. They were never the prize to win, but the question to answer. And the question was failed. So no, this was not a simple wound. This was the unraveling of something written larger than them. And what is written larger always writes back. What they held in their palms was nothing ordinary. It was something woven from patience, faith, and quiet strength. The kind of presence that does not appear twice. And yet they treated it as if it were forgettable, as if nothing valuable was at stake. Comfort made them careless. Routine made them blind. They believed that no matter how far they pushed or how deeply they wounded, that light would stay lit for them forever. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. They glanced at brilliance and assumed it was effortless. They never understood the storms it endured to remain warm, or the invisible battles that shaped its softness. Loving, forgiving, enduring. All of it carried a cost they never paid attention to. So when they let it go, they weren't just stepping away from a person, but from the thread that kept their own life from unraveling. Now, the air has changed. The ease they once knew has turned into a heavy silence. The job feels hollow. The company feels forced. The joy seems manufactured. Those they thought were replacements only remind them of what they lost. Empty smiles, shallow laughter, no anchor. Meanwhile, the one they discarded is growing into something unrecognizable, rising higher, glowing from within. Because when they cut that connection, they severed themselves from their own protection, their own luck, their own alignment with what is greater. What they mishandled was never just human affection. It was a rare kind of energy that the world doesn't give twice. And now that imbalance has come to collect. Now they walk through their days with a quiet ache that no distraction can quiet. The pictures they show the world look bright, but the hollowness behind them keeps growing. Regret keeps circling louder now, not because anyone wishes them harm, but because some laws of life simply return what was sent. They thought they were tossing away something ordinary, but now, surrounded by what truly is ordinary, they finally see it for what it was: priceless, irreplaceable, and forever out of reach. They stood at the threshold of something they couldn't name. What they found was a space where walls fell quiet, where masks dissolved, where something beyond understanding moved through the air. That presence didn't simply comfort, it transformed. Words didn't just soothe, they cut through confusion, like water through stone. But rather than honoring what they'd stumbled into, they wandered after illusions. They chased noise and spectacle, drawn to hollow excitement and the flash of what looked appealing but lacked depth. They weren't seeking truth. They were seeking to be distracted. They weren't ready to stand bare, so they ran toward places that let them stay hidden. Because standing here required a kind of honesty they couldn't offer. It didn't ask for perfection, but it did demand openness, and that was too steep a price. Here they were challenged, stretched, and invited to grow, and they mistook that invitation for a cage. They confused clarity for criticism and kindness for control. So they chose to leave, convinced they were choosing freedom. Step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. What they really chose was emptiness. Now their days are cluttered but hollow, surrounded by people, yet invisible among them. The show they once craved now feels stale, and no amount of noise can quiet the quiet they feel inside. The very thing they ran from has become the thing they can't stop thinking about. They reached for what was easy to hold, not what was hard to build. They wanted quick sparks, not lasting warmth. Now they miss everything they dismissed: the calm, the depth, the ability to feel truly seen. Only now do they realize that the presence they abandoned wasn't just a person. It was a sacred place, waiting for them to awaken. But when understanding finally arrived, that doorway had already closed, and the silence that remains now carries the weight of what they could have had but will never touch again. What unfolded wasn't a simple vanishing. It was a calculated retreat, cloaked as silence. The unread messages, the abrupt absence, the quiet withdrawal. None of it stemmed from busyness or self-preservation. It was an attempt to erase footprints, to cover what they didn't have the courage to confess. They fled, not out of strength, but out of fear. Fear of what they'd see reflected back if they stood still long enough to face it. There was no mystery in why they avoided your gaze. It wasn't confusion or overwhelm. It was the unbearable weight of your clarity, the way your steadiness exposed how brittle they truly felt. Disappearing wasn't about healing. It was about hiding from what their own actions revealed. They imagined if they stayed silent long enough, the memory of what they did would simply fade. But silence is not resolution. It is only a shadow stretched over the truth. Their quiet was not an inability to cope. It was a refusal to take responsibility. The weight of your presence reminded them of everything they'd rather deny, that they dismantled something rare, that they spoke falsehoods when they should have stood in honesty, that they placed ego above growth. They weren't avoiding you. They were dodging the mirror you held up to their spirit. They thought if they skipped the conversation, skipped the reckoning, they could also skip the consequences. But what they didn't understand is that what's set into motion doesn't stop because they stop showing up. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. A person can block a number, but they cannot escape the vibration they sent into the air. And now that energy has circled back around them, catching them in quiet moments, catching them between breaths. The very memory they tried to bury now blooms in unexpected hours, in dreams, in casual words from strangers, in fragments of songs and silences too loud to ignore. What they mistook for composure was really paralysis. Their quiet wasn't wisdom, but panic. The kind of panic that comes when one realizes they've harmed someone under unseen protection. That void they left wasn't peace. It was guilt echoing against the emptiness they created when they walked away. What happened between you wasn't just fractured trust dressed up as heartbreak. It ran far deeper, through layers neither of you spoke aloud. While you built something with clean hands and clear intentions, they became an instrument for forces that could never reach you directly. Through them, what could not touch you outright found a way to step close. This wasn't just carelessness or immaturity. It was infiltration, subtle, deliberate, and corrosive. While you poured light into them, they were lending their ear, their words, their time to those who harbored resentment toward everything you embodied. The betrayal was not just personal. It was a collaboration with those who quietly rooted for your collapse. They didn't merely lie or deceive. They aligned themselves with people who long envied the very things they once praised in you. They joined in when others twisted your name. They fed the embers of rumors. They entertained conversations that reduced you. They were not simply neglectful, they were present at tables where your integrity was served up and picked apart. Whether they knew it or not, they allowed themselves to be a passageway. Their lack of strength, their hunger for approval, their fragile ego made them easy to recruit. One moment, you were their safe harbor. The next, they were carrying whispers back and forth, splitting themselves between loyalty and destruction. You sensed it before you could name it. You caught glimpses of the betrayal, but chose to respond with patience, believing you could steady them, believing you could outshine the darkness in their orbit. But by the time you realized how far they'd gone, the damage was already done. They had handed over pieces of you to those who wished you harm, opening doors that were never theirs to open. When they saw that nothing they tried could undo you, they withdrew, hoping their absence would bleed you instead. But what they failed to understand is that what protects you doesn't need defending. It sees, it waits, it restores. The weight of what they participated in now sits with them. Every sharp word, every false alliance, every secret they carried is finding its way back. What they sought to shatter was untouchable. What they broke was their own reflection. Because when someone becomes a willing accomplice to harm what is sacred, the damage never stops at the target. It turns inward and consumes them whole. What they never noticed was how much was being held together simply by your quiet presence. They mistook the steady rhythm of their days for luck, for coincidence, for their own doing, never realizing that you were quietly weaving stability into everything around them. They assumed they could sever the connection without consequence, walking away as though what you brought could simply be replaced. They thought nothing would change, that their path would remain smooth, that opportunities would keep arriving, that the comfort would remain intact. But the moment you stepped back, the thread was pulled. Suddenly, what felt certain began to tremble. The job turned unpredictable. The friendships fractured. The new romance grew sharp and heavy. They sit now in the aftermath, confused but unable to deny the shift. Because what's unraveling is not just luck running out, but the unseen protection withdrawing. You were never just another companion. You were the quiet architect of their calm, the one whose unseen efforts kept storms from reaching them, the one whose presence intercepted consequences before they could strike. What they feel now isn't random misfortune. It's the reality of what happens when you disconnect from the very force that was holding you up. The scaffolding is gone, the balance is broken, and every part of their life they thought was unshakable has begun to sway. This is the wake-up call they couldn't ignore, the clarity that arrives too late, the realization that you weren't simply filling space. You were the foundation. And only now, as everything they leaned on gives way beneath them, do they understand what they let slip away. The collapse isn't cruelty, it's just the truth revealing itself, piece by piece, after the illusion has shattered. What they misunderstood from the start was that your kindness was never ordinary. They mistook your insight for chatter, your care for convenience, your guidance for noise. They couldn't see that what stood beside them was no accident, but a force sent to shield, to ground, to steady them when they could not stand on their own. You weren't simply good-natured. You were a safeguard, walking in human form. Every time you encouraged their dreams, held space for their confusion, stayed present through their indifference, you were channeling something higher than yourself, something they could not name but always felt. And yet they dismissed it. They mocked what they didn't understand. They sneered at the wisdom that protected them, scoffed at the intuition that warned them, and rolled their eyes at the quiet strength that kept them from collapse. They felt the peace you brought, but refused to respect where it came from. They assumed the calm you carried was just part of you, easy, inevitable. They thought your glow was nothing but charm, something they could find anywhere. They didn't realize that beneath the surface, you were quietly catching the weight of what would have crushed them, softening the blows they never even saw coming. But now, the gap you left is undeniable. Even if they can't explain it, they feel it, a subtle chaos threading through everything, an unease they can't shake. Nothing aligns quite the way it used to. Nothing fills the silence you once held so effortlessly. They reach for what you gave, but it doesn't exist anywhere else, because it was never a skill to be learned. It was a gift given. They didn't just lose someone kind-hearted, they lost a protective force disguised as love. And now, standing in the wake of what they mocked, they begin to understand that the blessing didn't vanish because it faded. It left because it was disrespected. They assumed your tears marked defeat, your quiet meant surrender, and your pain signaled an end. Watching you unravel, doubting yourself, stumbling through the weight of betrayal, they let pride swell in them, convinced they'd broken something beyond repair. They believed walking away or mistreating you had left you hollow. What they couldn't see was that you were not collapsing, you were being forged. Every ache stretched you beyond what you thought possible. Every silence reshaped you. Every sleepless night cracked open a strength you didn't know you carried. You weren't ending, you were emerging, a sharper, more deliberate version of yourself, shedding the illusions you once clung to. They cheered too early. They misread your stillness as ruin, your sadness as finality. But you were discarding what could no longer come with you. Their laughter only echoed louder in your memory, fueling a quiet resolve. While they gloated, you were unlearning, you were untangling, you were rising. Every tear marked the death of an old story. Every heavy breath lifted the fog of their manipulation. The more they ridiculed, the faster you detached, the clearer you became. What they mistook for your undoing was really your unburdening, stripping away what no longer belonged so something new could take shape. They never realized their presence was only temporary, because the weight they brought couldn't survive where you were headed. That pain wasn't punishment. It was the pressure required to bring forth something extraordinary. Their shallow triumphs faded as you stepped into clarity. And when the dust settled, it became obvious. Those tears they mocked were the seeds of your transformation. What they thought was your fall was actually the ground making way for your ascent. They just lacked the vision to see it. And by the time they did, it was far too late. You'd already outgrown the very place they left you in. Your breaking point was perfectly timed, and the smirk they wore as you wept became their regret as you rose. Because what they witnessed wasn't destruction, it was rebirth in motion. They believed they could control the story by speaking first. They rushed to tell their version, bending facts, seasoning lies, and sprinkling just enough truth to sound convincing. They believed that by painting you in the harshest light, they could mask their own cracks and keep their hands looking clean. But all they accomplished was revealing themselves, not because you fought back, but because truth has its own way of rising. They failed to understand that smearing someone rooted in integrity only stains the one doing the smearing. They shared half-truths with eager ears, hoping to gain sympathy, spinning you as unreasonable, dramatic, or fragile. But the more they spoke, the more they stumbled. The bitterness in their tone, the urgency in their words, the rehearsed indignation all began to betray them. And the listeners noticed, quietly, without needing to say a word. They began to remember the steadiness you carried, the patience you offered, the peace you brought. Doubt crept into their minds. If you were truly as flawed as they say, why does their life look heavier now? Why do they keep mentioning you if they've moved on? The gossip they counted on to shield them instead uncovered them. Their allies started watching differently, listening differently, questioning the inconsistencies. and the silence on your part, your decision to let your actions speak instead, only sharpened the contrast. You didn't have to shout or defend yourself. You didn't have to match their noise. The quiet dignity with which you moved became its own testimony. Their narrative began to crumble on its own, under the weight of their own contradictions. They wanted you stripped bare in front of others, but in the end, it was they who stood exposed. Not because you tore them down, but because guilt has a sound that no one can ignore. They tried to cloak themselves in lies, but the fabric gave way, and what remained was undeniable. In trying to protect their fragile pride, they built a story too fragile to stand. And now, piece by piece, it collapses. Not because you demanded justice, but because truth never stays buried for long. They believed they could reshape the narrative to their advantage, but the truth held its ground. They recast themselves as the wronged one, polished their own story, and positioned you as the source of all the conflict. They trimmed away inconvenient facts, embellished minor mistakes, and painted you in a light that hid their own shadows. On the surface, it almost worked. They repeated it so often, even they began to buy their own fiction. But no matter how many times they rehearsed the scene, the truth never went anywhere. It simply stood in quiet contrast, untouched and waiting. Everything they hid, everything they twisted, every quiet betrayal they thought was forgotten, remained intact, recorded in ways they couldn't erase. Those who listened may have nodded, may have even sympathized, but that only covered the surface. Beneath it, the weight of reality was already at work. Being louder does not make one honest. Moving on fast does not make one innocent. The essence of what really happened needs no audience to validate it. It simply is. What they failed to see is that the path you walk is not just personal, it carries a deeper purpose. And meddling with that is not merely manipulation, it's an offense against something larger. That kind of interference always carries a cost. The consequences rarely arrive as lightning strikes. They show themselves slowly, in fraying connections, in restless nights, in the unraveling of what they thought they controlled. The cracks are showing now, quietly but clearly, and what once looked convincing is starting to fall apart.